Out here in the Wild West, a man's past rides with him.
She wanted his land. He built her a home. Instead, she came for his land, with a map in her hand and a lie on her lips. Thought she could take what he owned like the world had always taken from her. But he didn't fight her, didn't curse or turn her away. He built her a roof instead, one nail, one board, one quiet mercy at a time. Land don't matter much, he said. It's what you build on it that counts. Somewhere between guilt and forgiveness, she found something worth keeping. Not the land, but the man who made it home. And by the sunset, she wasn't claiming ground anymore. She was belonging. Before we begin, take a moment to comment the name of your city. Where are you watching from tonight, and when the story ends? Don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. The American West. 1887. The prairie wind rose in swirling red dust, as if trying to swallow the sky burning with the last light of sunset. An old wooden house stood alone in that dry land, silent, isolated, and as unyielding as the man who lived inside it. Elias Cole had once been a soldier. He had seen more than any man should ever see in one lifetime. Now, he lived alone on the land his father left behind. He didn't talk much. He didn't smile much either. Every evening, he sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the far-off ridges, listening to the distant sound of a train, the breath of a world slowly leaving this frontier behind. Then one evening, the rhythm of hooves broke through the wind. Out of the crimson horizon came a young woman, small, weary, but with eyes that held their own kind of fire. Her long dress was covered in dust, and her hands gripped the reins tightly, as if she had been riding for days without rest. She stopped at the gate, breathing hard, voice rough with thirst. I lost my way. Could I stay the night? Elias looked at her, silent. The wind carried the scent of dry earth and horse sweat. He didn't ask where she came from, nor why she was traveling alone across this unforgiving land. He simply nodded, opening the creaking wooden door. There's an empty room inside. Clara Hale stepped in. The smell of old wood, bitter coffee, and warm ash from the stove made her chest loosen for the first time in days. She felt safe. But when she bent down to remove her coat, a folded piece of parchment slipped from her pocket and fell to the floor. The lamplight caught at a map, drawn with red boundary lines. A rail survey map. The new railway line would cut straight through Elias's land. He bent down to pick it up. His eyes lingered on the inked dots for a long time. No anger, no fear, only a slow, quiet sorrow. His voice came out low and husky, like wind moving through dry grass. You came for the land, but land don't matter much. It's what you build on it that counts. Clara froze. She couldn't speak. She thought he would throw her out or worse, rage at her, but he didn't. Elias simply placed the map back on the table, turned toward the hearth, and stirred the fire. Nights get cold out here. You should warm yourself. The firelight brushed across his face, tanned, weathered, but inexplicably gentle. Clara watched him, her heart tangled in ways she couldn't name. She had been sent here to deceive, to measure, to take. But this man, he was unlike anyone she had ever met. He didn't fear losing his land. He didn't cling to it out of greed. The way he looked at the earth outside it wasn't possession. It was reverence, as if he saw in it the resting place of everything he had ever loved, lost, and remembered. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the door, carrying the first chill of night. The map fluttered again, falling to the floor. Clara bent down to pick it up, her hands trembling. And in that fleeting moment, she realized she hadn't just stepped into the house of a stranger. She had stepped into the life of a man who might change hers forever. Clara sat quietly by the fire, her gaze soft and uncertain. Outside, the sunset had long since faded, but inside that small wooden house, another kind of light had begun to burn fragile, flickering, yet strong enough to warm two hearts that had forgotten what human warmth felt like. Part 1. The Man Who Didn't Ask. Morning broke softly over the prairie. Sunlight filtered through the dusty window, slicing the air into thin golden beams that mingled with the slow curls of coffee steam. The scent of bitter beans and wood smoke filled the little kitchen, warm and quiet. Outside, the land still glistened with dew. The wind carried the smell of dry earth and horse's breath, a smell that belonged only to the west. Clara Hale sat quietly at the small wooden table, her hands clasped together for warmth. She wasn't used to this kind of silence. No wagon wheels, no shouting, no merchants or drunks. Only the sound of wind brushing past the roof and the faint clink of metal cups as Elias Cole poured coffee. He stood by the stove, tall, broad-shouldered, his shirt darkened by smoke. His hands were rough, his movements slow and steady, the kind of rhythm born from a man who had learned to do everything in silence. So his heart wouldn't break again. Clara didn't know why she couldn't stop watching him. Maybe because there was something in his stillness, a quiet that didn't come from peace, but from endurance. He didn't ask who she was or why she was here. He just saw a stranger and offered shelter and a cup of warmth. She smiled faintly, though her heart felt uneasy. She had met all kinds of men, the rich ones who spoke in numbers, the land barons who treated women like currency, the charmers who lied with soft voices and hard eyes. But this one was different. Elias placed the pot down and pulled a chair across from her. He didn't look directly at her, just slid a tin cup across the table. Drink. The night gets cold out here. His voice was low, rough, cracked in places where grief had settled years ago. She wrapped her hands around the cup. The warmth seeped through her palms, up to her chest. For a while, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of the wind brushing against the curtain filled the space between them. Clara's eyes wandered. The cabin was simple, clean, almost unnaturally neat. Every object had its place. From the rifle on the wall to the boots lined beside the door. Above the mantel hung a photograph, a woman and a young boy. Smiling softly, her heart tightened. She understood, without needing to ask. This man had once had everything and lost it. Her voice trembled slightly when she asked, "How long have you lived out here, alone?" Elias looked up, his blue-gray eyes catching the morning light. Long enough to know every morning looks the same. The words hung heavy in the air, spoken like a man who no longer expected change. No joy, no anticipation. Just another sunrise, another day that asked nothing of him. Like the dry land outside, cracked but still standing, year after year. Clara turned to the window, far beyond the hills. Thin plumes of smoke rose from the east, the rail workers, laying foundation for the new line. She knew what that meant. Once the railroad reached here, this land would be leveled, claimed, erased. Elias's home would be gone, and she, the one sent to make that happen, was sitting at his table, pretending to belong. She steadied her breath, then asked softly, "Ever thought about selling this place?" Elias was silent for a moment. He looked past her, out to where the sunlight caught the dying grass. A faint breeze ruffled his hair before he finally spoke. "Selling means leaving. And I've done enough leaving in my life." The words landed between them like a confession. "I've done enough leaving in my life." He wasn't talking about land. He was talking about loss. Elias lowered his eyes to his cup. His voice came out quieter now, almost to himself. When you lose the people you love, you realize land can't hold anyone, but it holds the memories, and sometimes that's enough. His tone was rough, carried on the breath of wind sneaking through the cracks of the cabin. Clara wanted to reply, but her throat tightened. She, too, had lost a father, a home, the faith that there was still a place in the world for her. She'd come west believing money could buy back what she'd lost. But hearing Elias speak, she realized some things people keep not because they're valuable, but because they carry the pain they can't let go of. The silence returned, softer this time. Only the faint clinking of a spoon and the distant sound of a bird outside. When Clara looked up, Elias was already watching her. Their eyes met just for a moment, but it was enough. Something unseen shifted between them, a fragile connection, like the first spark before a fire takes. She smiled faintly. "You haven't asked who I am, or where I'm from." Elias took a slow sip of his coffee. "If you need to tell me, you will. If not, silence tells its own story." The words settled deep inside her, a warmth no fire could give. No one had ever told her that before. No one had ever allowed her silence to be enough for so long. She'd lived behind masks, saying what others wanted, smiling when her soul was hollow. But here, in this cabin with this quiet man, she didn't have to be anyone else. Elias rose, slipping into his coat. "There's a creek behind the hill if you want to wash up. I'll be out fixing the fence." When the door closed behind him, Clara turned toward the wall. The morning light caught the photograph again, lighting up the woman's kind smile. The boy's little arms wrapped around his father's neck. A family that once was now gone, scattered like the dust beyond the fields. She reached out, touching the frame lightly. "You held on to your memories," she whispered. "I ran from mine, outside." The rhythmic clang of metal striking wood echoed faintly. Elias at work. Each blow was steady, grounded, like the heartbeat of a man who'd lost everything but refused to stop living. Clara stepped out onto the porch. The golden light of morning draped across his shoulders as he worked, dust swirling around him like fog. He didn't know she was watching, or maybe he did, and just didn't mind. He worked with quiet purpose, and in that silence, Clara felt something stir deep inside her, a strange, tender ache, the recognition of decency. When Elias looked up, their eyes met again, only for a breath, but it was enough to make her heart stumble. Across the vast, empty prairie, two lost souls simply saw each other not as liar and victim, not as enemy and stranger, but as two broken hearts trying to remember what trust felt like. And in that quiet, Clara understood she hadn't come here just to take his land. She had come to find something she'd lost long ago: faith, kindness, and maybe herself. Part 2. The First Nail. The western afternoon was dry enough that even the wind carried heat and dust. The sky held no clouds, only a washed-out yellow stretching endlessly over the plains. From the horizon, a gust swept across the land, howling like a wild thing. The wooden panels on the horse barn rattled violently, a chain clanged against the wall, and within seconds part of the roof tore loose, spinning through the air before crashing into the dirt. Elias looked up from the fence he was mending, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. He dropped his hammer and strode toward the barn. The wind kicked up dust around his boots. The smell of sunburned wood thick in the air. Inside, the horses whinnied and stomped, terrified by the approaching sandstorm. Clara was fetching water from the creek when she heard the chaos. She ran back. The hem of her skirt whipped by the wind, hair tangled around her face. The sight stopped her breath. Elias was fighting the storm, gripping a heavy plank, trying to hold it against the broken frame. Dust swirled around him, his back bent against the wind. Without thinking, she rushed forward, grabbed the other end of the board. Elias turned, startled. Careful. The wind strong. But she only gritted her teeth and held tighter. The wind roared. Her skirt lashed around her legs. Strands of hair plastered to her cheeks. Elias lifted his hammer and drove a nail through the plank, each strike ringing like thunder. When the piece was secured, he glanced at her, her hands trembling from gripping the nails too hard. He gave a faint, crooked smile. Careful. Nails bite harder than snakes. Clara laughed breathlessly. The sound nearly lost to the storm. Then I'd better learn to take a bite. They kept working, wordless. The air was filled with the rhythm of hammer and heartbeat, the language of two people moving together without needing to speak. Each strike drove more than a nail, it sealed a little of the distance between them. The wind funneled through the cracks in the roof, lifting a few strands of Clara's hair onto Elias's shoulder. He looked over, the light catching the sweat on her brow, her brown eyes bright fierce, but fragile. Neither of them was used to someone standing beside them. He had learned to live with silence. She had learned to hide behind lies. But now, they were doing something rare, building something, together. Elias motioned for her to switch places. Hold it like this, then hit once. Straight down. Don't be scared. Clara held the hammer, awkward but determined. He stepped closer, placing his rough hand around her wrist, guiding her motion. He was so near she could feel his breath at the back of her neck. Her heartbeat quickened faster than the rhythm of the wind. "Don't shake," he murmured. It wasn't a command, it was comfort. She exhaled slowly, raised the hammer. Clang. The first nail bent sideways. Again. Elias said, voice calm. Clang. The second hit landed true, firm. He smiled. Not bad. You learn quicker than I thought. Clara looked at the nail sunk deep into the beam, her lips curving into a small smile. I just did what you told me to. The wind began to settle. Sunlight spilled across the field, turning the barn and their skin the color of copper. Elias straightened. Studying their work, the roof held, steady against the fading storm. He let out a long breath. Clara sank onto the step, hands still trembling. A laugh caught between exhaustion and relief. Then, in the hush that followed the wind, Elias spoke his tone casual, but the weight beneath it unmistakable. You know, I never let anyone help me fix this place before. Everything here, I've done alone. Clara looked up. Because you didn't trust them to do it right. He shook his head slowly. No, because I was afraid they'd leave. The words hit her like the echo of her own fears. That deep, unspoken dread of opening your heart only to watch someone walk away. He didn't look at her when he said it, just stared at the horizon, where the sky was turning a burnt red. A horse neighed, breaking the heavy air. Elias walked over, laid a hand on its mane, whispering calm. Clara watched him. Realizing something about this man, his strength wasn't loud. It was steady, gentle. He didn't comfort with words, but with presence. And somehow, that made her feel safe. As the sun dipped below the ridge, Elias picked up the hammer and drove the final nail in place. The sharp clack of metal against wood echoed once, then faded. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. The last light of day glimmered in his eyes, warm, deep, unguarded. Clara stood there, watching him. Their eyes met, no longer cautious, no longer uncertain. Something had softened, settled between them. Elias smiled a rare, quiet smile. That's it. Clara nodded. Thank you for letting me help. He just gave a small nod. But the look he gave her wasn't the wary stare of a landowner watching a stranger. It was the look of a man remembering what trust felt like, tentative, fragile, but real. On the roof, the last nail caught the sunset and gleamed gold. The wind had gone still, and inside both of them, something new had been built, fragile as that patched roof, but strong enough to shelter two weary hearts from the storm within. Part 3. The Map in the Dark. That night, the darkness never fully settled. A thin mist of rain blanketed the prairie, softening the moonlight like a sheer veil drawn over old memories. The wind had gone quiet, but the air was thick, heavy with something unspoken, as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Inside the wooden cabin, Clara Hale couldn't sleep. She lay listening to the patter of rain on the roof, the faint crackle of wood in the fire. Every sound felt too clear, too still, the kind of peace that frightened her because it made her feel undeserving of it. The lamp on the table still burned low. Elias's door was half closed. His footsteps had been silent for hours. Clara sat up, pulled a shawl around her shoulders, and moved carefully, every step light, like a thief's. On the table lay a few simple things: a worn pocket watch, a carving knife, a half-empty pot of coffee, and the map. Not Elias's, hers. The one she had been paid to bring. The one that marked every boundary, every mile of land her employers meant to take. The lamplight shimmered over the black lines, glinting like veins of guilt. She unfolded it slowly, hands trembling. Each mark, each number felt like a cut through something living. It's just land, she whispered to herself. Just dirt. Nothing grows here anyway. But the lie fell flat, hollow. Because she had seen it, the life that existed in this place. In every plank Elias had nailed, in every horse he calmed, in the way his eyes lifted to the sky before rain. This wasn't just land. It was memory. A place where someone had buried both love and loss. The wooden floor creaked behind her. Clara froze. When she turned, Elias Cole was standing in the doorway. The lamp's glow caught the rough lines of his face, weathered, quiet, eyes dark and deep with sleeplessness. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at the map on the table, and then at her. His voice was low, coarse, carrying something too heavy for anger. "You ain't lost." Are you? Clara clutched the map to her chest, throat tightening. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, each drop drumming against the roof like a racing heartbeat. She tried to speak, her voice shaking. They said it was just land, just dirt, not worth keeping. Elias didn't move for a long time. Then he took a step forward, and another, until he stood close enough for her to see the flicker of firelight in his eyes. When he spoke, his words came slow, deep like something torn open after being buried too long. "It's where I buried my son." The room fell apart in silence. Clara felt her heart stop for a breath. The world outside seemed to fade. There was only his voice, heavy as the rain. He turned away, facing the window. The lamplight haloed his shoulders, melting into the mist. He was 3. Died in the fever. Buried behind the hill. I planted an oak there, every time the wind blows through it. I swear I can still hear him laugh. He paused, hand braced on the frame. His next words trembled the kind that cost a man everything to say. "They told me to leave, to forget." But how do you walk away from the ground that holds your heart? Clara took a step back, tears already blurring her vision. She wanted to say she was sorry. She wanted to tell him she hadn't known. But none of it mattered because she had come here to take what little he had left. He didn't look at her. His voice, when it came again, was low and final. "You want the land. Take it. But don't you ever call it just dirt again." Clara's hands went limp. The map slipped from her grasp, falling to the floor. The ink bled in the damp air, lines warping, boundaries fading. She sank to her knees. Rain seeped through the cracks, cold against her skin. Tears streamed down her face, not out of fear, but shame. For the first time in years, she hated the woman she had become. Elias didn't move toward her. He just stood there silent, still. Maybe he knew that some lessons only tears could teach. The rain thickened, hammering against the roof. The lamp flickered, shadows dancing wildly on the walls. Clara picked up the map, her hands trembling, and without another thought, threw it into the fire. Flames leapt high, red and hungry, devouring the paper. The lines and numbers, all the greed, all the lies curled, blackened, and vanished in smoke. Elias watched her. His expression didn't change much, but something in his eyes softened a quiet ache, a glimmer of understanding. He wasn't angry anymore, just human. Clara stayed kneeling, her hands covering her face. Rain and tears mixed, dripping onto the wooden floor. Through the fading light, she saw their shadows cast on the wall. 2 figures, one guilty, one grieving, both bent under the same truth that compassion, once awakened, can burn through both deceit and sin. Outside, the rain fell steady, soaking the barren land. Inside that little cabin, 2 souls, one forgiving, one redeemed, listened to the same rain, each drop a quiet hymn of mercy. That night, for the first time since she arrived, Clara didn't feel cold, because she had lost the only thing worth losing, her greed. and in return, she had found something she thought was gone forever: her conscience. Part 4. The morning after the storm. Dawn after the rain always carried a different kind of scent: the damp breath of earth, the musk of soaked wood, and the lingering chill that clung to the air like a memory. Across the prairie, the sky was so clear it looked freshly washed. Everything was still. The only sounds were the whisper of wind through the trees and the soft, waking song of birds in the distance. Clara Hale stepped outside, her hair still damp, her coat streaked with mud. She hadn't slept. The rain had fallen until morning, and every drop that struck the roof had echoed through her chest, a reminder of what she had seen, heard, and done the night before. The map was gone, burned to ash, but somehow she could still feel the ashes in her heart. She looked around. The land she had once seen as a target looked nothing like that now. Raindrops clung to the fence posts, shimmering in the newborn light. The brown horse drank quietly by the creek, and farther away, the small oak tree swayed gently in the wind, the one Elias had said, "That's where I hear my boy laugh." She stepped onto the porch. Part of the roof had been torn away by the storm. A few planks splintered, nails bent. Clara took a slow breath. She didn't know why, but she wanted to fix it. Not to atone, not to prove anything, but to stay. She went back inside and found an old hammer and a small pouch of nails. They felt heavier than she expected. With every strike, she wasn't just repairing wood, she was driving down the guilt that kept hammering inside her. The rhythmic sound of metal meeting wood broke the stillness of the morning. Each hit echoed like a heartbeat, alone in the cool air. She worked clumsy, shaky, but determined. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her hands blistered, yet her eyes were steady. From a distance, Elias saw her. He had been awake since dawn, tightening the saddle on his horse when the sound of hammering reached him. He stopped and looked toward the porch, saw her small figure, straight-backed, swinging the hammer with uncertain strength. He didn't need to ask what she was doing. And for the first time in a long while, a faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. He walked closer, quietly. When Clara looked up, sunlight poured across his shoulders, turning the porch into honeyed gold. He said nothing, just raised a hand and held the plank in place for her. They stood face to face, close enough to feel each other's breath. Their hands brushed only for a moment, but it was enough. Clara felt warmth rush from her palm straight to her heart. She tried to pull back, but Elias's calm voice stopped her. "Hold it steady. I'll nail it down." He lifted the hammer, the first strike firm and sure. She held tight, feeling the vibration of the blow travel through the wood, through her arms, into her chest, her heartbeat falling in rhythm with his. The world around them seemed to fade. There was only the sound of breath and wood, and with each thud, it felt as if something invisible between them was being built, not just a porch roof, but perhaps trust. Clara spoke softly, afraid to disturb the fragile peace. "You don't have to do this. For me." Elias didn't look at her. He kept working. "I'm not doing it for you." He paused, wiped his brow, then added quietly, "I'm doing it for the house. It deserves a roof again." Clara said nothing, but she understood he wasn't just talking about wood and nails. He was talking about the home inside his heart, the one that had fallen years ago, and that, somehow, she was now helping him rebuild. The sun climbed higher, spreading light across the wet prairie. Elias drove the last nail into place, then set the hammer down. He stepped back, inspecting the roof. It held firm now. No more leaks. Clara wiped the sweat from her forehead. Her lips pressed together. Elias turned toward her, voice quiet, but carrying more truth than 100 words could hold. You don't fix a home for someone who plans to leave. The words struck her harder than the sound of any hammer. She froze, her throat tight. No reply came, only tears, slipping silently down her cheeks, mixing with the dew still clinging to the wood. Elias saw, but didn't ask why. He simply handed her a cloth to wipe her hands, then turned and walked toward the open field. Clara watched him go, her voice barely a whisper. Maybe. I don't want to leave anymore. A soft breeze passed through, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth, the scent of new beginnings. The boards they had repaired still glistened with moisture, but under the sunlight, they shone as if the house itself had come back to life. Clara stood there, the hammer still in her hand, and for the first time in years, she felt something clear and certain. Staying was no longer a sign of defeat. It was the bravest choice she could make. In that quiet morning, surrounded by the vast western plain, she realized some homes aren't built from wood and nails. They're built from forgiveness and the courage to stay. Part 5. The Visit. That afternoon, the prairie burned with a strange, golden stillness. There was no wind, no thunder yet. The air felt heavy, as if it carried the scent of a coming storm. Not a storm of weather, but of men. Clara Hale was by the creek, letting the horse drink, when she heard the distant rumble of wheels. A carriage appeared over the ridge, pulled by 3 black horses, raising clouds of dust behind it. Inside sat 3 men in dark suits out of place in this red-brown wilderness. The carriage rolled to a stop before the ranch gate. The wheels crunched over dry gravel with a slow, grinding sound that felt like a warning. Elias Cole stepped out from the barn, hands still smeared with oil. He didn't flinch, didn't ask. His eyes were calm, as if he'd been expecting this day for a long time. The man in front, tall, hair slicked back, voice dry and sharp, spoke first. Mr. Cole, we're here on behalf of the Union Rail Company. This is the final offer. Sign today, and you'll be paid in cash double the original price. Elias didn't even glance at the paper. He brushed his hands clean on a rag and said quietly, "Told you before. This land's not for sale." The man chuckled, lighting a cigarette. "You know the railroad's coming through here, don't you? Right across this patch. Once the tracks go down, the law will be on our side. You'll lose it all. From a distance." Clara froze. She recognized them, the men she once worked for, the men who had sent her here. As the carriage dust settled, their eyes met hers. The air turned colder. The second man smirked. "Well, if it isn't Miss Hale, back from her fieldwork." "I see." Elias turned toward her. His gaze was slow, heavy, not angry but stripped of warmth, and that hurt more than fury ever could. He didn't need anyone to explain. The map, the questions, her arrival, it all fit now, like pieces falling into place. He turned back to the men, his voice steady. "You're late." The first man frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Elias looked at Clara when he answered. "Means I've got nothing left you can take." but she does. The words hit Clara like a blow to the chest. She wanted to shout, to say she had changed, that she had burned the map, that she wasn't one of them anymore, but her voice wouldn't come. Because Elias already knew. And still, he chose not to hate her. The third man stepped forward, slamming the contract onto the porch table. Sign it, Cole, or the company will lay the tracks with or without your name on it. A gust of wind stirred the dust. Elias stood straight, eyes calm but sharp as a blade. I buried the people I love on this land. If you want to take it, you'll have to dig them up first. The men exchanged uneasy glances, half mocking, half uncertain. Clara gripped her skirt tightly, her throat burning. Every instinct screamed for her to speak, to defend him, but her legs felt rooted to the earth. The slick-haired man laughed dryly and turned to her. You did well, Clara. Pity you went soft before the job was done. Clara's breath caught. She looked at Elias. He didn't speak. No anger, no accusation. Just that deep, quiet sadness, the kind that sees everything and still refuses to hate. His voice broke the silence, low and rough, like the wind rolling over dry grass. You came for gold, but found something worth more. Clara's tears fell fast and hard. They hit the porch floor, darkening the dust. The men shifted, impatient, their voices rising. Enough of this, if you won't sign. Cole, we'll be back with a court order. Elias didn't answer. He turned, walked back into the house, and closed the door behind him. The wind rose again, lifting the dust and scattering the papers from the table. Clara bent down, picked up the contract. The bold words, "Transfer of all land rights," seemed to glow through the blur of her tears. Her fingers tightened around the page. Then, slowly, she straightened, facing the three men, the same men who once thought she was theirs to command. Her voice cracked, but it carried like thunder. You wanted his land, but he gave me something you'll never buy, and with a fierce cry, she tore the paper apart. The pieces flew through the air, white shreds twisting in the wind like falling petals in a storm. A single drop of rain fell, then another. And soon the sky opened again, the dust turning to mud, the rain washing everything clean. The men cursed, climbed into their carriage, and sped off, the wheels hissing through the wet ground. Clara stood alone in the rain, still clutching the soaked scraps of paper. When she turned, Elias was standing on the porch, silent, watching her. Their eyes met through the curtain of rain. No words were needed. She wasn't the woman who came to take any more. She was the one who stayed, the one willing to lose everything to keep the only thing that mattered, faith. The rain thickened. Elias stepped down from the porch, stood beside her. He didn't move to shelter, didn't look away. Together, they watched the torn contract dissolve into the mud. In that rain, soft, relentless, cleansing, Clara understood something profound. She didn't need his forgiveness, because his eyes already said what forgiveness truly meant. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing to believe that someone can change. Part 6. The Forgiveness. That evening, the western sky looked as if it were on fire. The sunset burned red, washing the entire prairie in a deep, molten copper light. The wind carried the scent of smoke, sun-scorched wood, and dry grass, beauty and sorrow woven into one breath. It was the kind of dusk that could make a man weep without knowing why. But Elias Cole felt no tears, only the heavy stillness inside him. He was by the fence again, hammer in hand, driving nails one by one. The weight of the tool didn't tire him. The real weight pressed somewhere deeper, in his chest. Since morning, he hadn't said a word. Not to Clara, not even to himself. The truth was already laid bare. She had come for the land. Yet, she was also the one who had stood in the storm and torn up the contract. Elias wasn't angry. He was simply quiet. Because when trust is hurt, it doesn't explode, it breaks softly, and it aches in silence. The sun sank lower, its light threading through the slats of the half-built fence, sketching the silhouette of a man trying to rebuild something life had once destroyed. Each strike of the hammer echoed like a slow heartbeat, steady, deliberate, and full of sorrow. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. Clara. She didn't speak. She just walked closer, holding a wooden plank in her arms. The sunlight caught her hair, turning it into strands of burning copper. She stopped a few steps away, then gently set the plank down before him. Elias paused, lowering the hammer. He looked at the plank and saw the word home carved into it by hand. The letters were uneven, cut deep in some places, shallow in others, but they were real. They were hers, carved not with skill, but with trembling honesty. He lifted his gaze to her. The sunset shimmered in his dark, weary eyes. Clara couldn't speak. Every apology she had rehearsed vanished the moment he looked at her. Elias set the hammer aside and stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse, low, carrying the kind of exhaustion that only comes after long silence. Ain't no home worth buildin' without someone to share it with. The words fell softly, like a confession not just hers, but his as well. Clara's eyes filled with tears, not from guilt, but from something deeper, the pain of being understood. The two stood in the amber light, framed by the half-built fence. The air was still. Only the whisper of the grass and the faint pulse of their hearts moved in the quiet. Elias watched her for a long time. His eyes were no longer guarded, no longer heavy with suspicion. Instead, they held something gentler, the kind of light found only in people who have suffered enough to know that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's courage. Clara smiled through her tears, a small, trembling smile, fragile as sunlight through morning fog. I don't know if I can call this a home yet, but I want to stay and learn how to build it. Elias nodded slowly. He bent down, lifted the plank with the word home, and nailed it to the fence. Each strike of the hammer carried a different sound, now not the rhythm of loneliness, but of two souls learning how to begin again. The sun slipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of dark orange bleeding into the sky. Elias stepped back, eyes fixed on the plank now firmly attached to the fence. A soft breeze swept across the prairie, carrying with it the rustle of oak leaves like a child's laughter echoing through time. Clara stood beside him. She didn't speak. He turned to her, and for the first time since they met, his lips curved into a smile, slow, faint, but real. No forgiveness was spoken. No explanations were needed. Just two broken people standing beneath a burning western sky where sorrow finally stopped walking and peace took its first breath. On the fence, the word home stood out, rough and uneven but glowing in the last light of day. Like a promise unspoken from this moment on, this land would no longer just be soil. It would be home. Part 7, The Garden They Planted Spring, had finally returned to the prairie. After months of drought and dust, the late winter rains had softened the earth. The once cracked ground was now dark, damp, and fragrant, the smell of rebirth rising from every inch of soil. Above, the sky stretched impossibly blue, and the wind carried the scent of new grass and the songs of distant birds, whispers that life had found its way back. On the land that had once been a symbol of loss, the sound of an iron plow now cut through the morning air. Elias Cole moved slowly, steadily, both hands gripping the worn handles of the plow. His back was bent, his breath heavy, but every furrow he drew was straight as truth. Behind him walked Clara Hale, cradling a burlap sack filled with seeds, corn, barley, and a few wildflower seeds she had picked up in a small town 2 days ago. Each of their footsteps fell soft against the moist ground, the rhythm of two lives quietly rebuilding. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Silence had become their language, a peaceful kind, the kind shared by people who no longer had anything to hide. Elias paused, wiped the sweat from his brow, and looked over the rows of freshly turned earth. A rare smile flickered across his face. Clara stepped forward, opened the sack, and began to scatter the seeds. Her hands, pale and stained with soil, moved gently, deliberate, reverent. She wasn't just planting crops. She was planting faith. Every seed that sank into the damp ground carried a quiet prayer. Grow, live, forgive. The breeze stirred, lifting strands of her hair and carrying the scent of fresh soil. Elias watched her, his eyes no longer haunted by sorrow, but softened with something deeper. He realized then this woman, the one who had once come to deceive him, was now giving back to this land the one thing he thought he had lost forever: life. Clara looked up, catching his gaze. A faint smile bloomed on her lips, warm and shy as the first spring light. "You know," she said softly, almost to herself, "this land, it's still yours." Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped closer, boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. When he spoke, his voice was low, rough, but tender like the soil after rain. "No, it's ours now." The word "ours" hung in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. Clara froze, her fingers still dusted with seeds. Ours. Not just a word about land, but about belonging, about choosing to stay. Her eyes shimmered as she smiled, a tear tracing down her cheek, not from sadness, but from wonder. Elias reached for her hand, took a few seeds from her palm, and knelt beside her. Together, they pressed the seeds into the soil. Their fingers brushed, grounding them both in something wordless and eternal, life taking root beneath their hands, above them. Golden light filtered through the thinning clouds, spilling across the field two souls, once lost, now side by side, sowing their shared future. Elias murmured, half to himself, "My father used to say, the land never betrays those who care for it." Clara smiled gently, "Like the heart, right." He looked at her and nodded, eyes gleaming softly. There was no need for more words. They went back to work. And with every seed that fell, the wind sighed as if nature itself was helping them begin again. By the time the sun had climbed high, the field stretched wide and alive around them. Elias leaned on the plow handle, surveying what they had done. The house, the soil, even the air felt different, lighter, renewed. Clara came beside him, her muddy hand resting gently on his arm. "You see," she said, "the land's alive again, Elias looked down at the rich soil, then at her. His voice, rough but full of warmth, broke the silence. The land, the people, and my heart too. A soft wind rose, carrying the scent of new corn and fresh rain. Beneath the soil, seeds began their silent work, reaching upward toward light. And on this land once dead, once fought over love, that priceless, untamable thing, was taking root. They stood there for a long while, saying nothing, because they didn't need to. What they were building wasn't a promise of tomorrow, but the quiet, steady grace of today. Across the prairie, the wind whispered through the trees, "This land's still yours. No, it's ours now." And in that moment, Elias and Clara understood they hadn't just saved a piece of land. They had saved their own hearts. Part 8. The Letter from the City. Noon settled softly over the western plains. The sky was impossibly clear, an endless dome of blue. Sunlight poured down through the wooden fence, spilling in golden streaks across the porch where Clara Hale sat, sewing the corner of an old linen cloth. The windmill creaked faintly in the distance. The horses breathed slow and steady in their stalls. It was the kind of quiet so complete that she almost forgot there was still a world beyond this little patch of land. Until the mail wagon stopped at the gate. The postman, a man in a brown coat and wide hat, tipped his brim and handed her a thick envelope sealed with gold wax, bearing the insignia of the Union Rail Company. Clara froze for a moment. She knew that handwriting sharp, deliberate, and familiar enough to sting. It was from Mr. Stone, the man who had once hired her. The man who had given her the map that almost destroyed everything. She stood still for a long while. The prairie wind tugged gently at the letter in her hand. Then she heard footsteps crunching over dirt. Elias Cole was walking back from the field, shovel in hand, his clothes streaked with mud and sunlight. He stopped by the porch, his voice low and rough, as if carried on the wind. "Letter from the city." Clara nodded. She didn't answer further. Instead, she sat at the table and broke the seal. The paper inside smelled faintly of new ink, crisp, clean, and cold. But each word she read seemed to thicken the air around her, Miss Hale. "We've been informed that you exceeded expectations in your last assignment. The company is prepared to welcome you back. With double salary, a position as special secretary awaits you at our main office in Denver. If you depart the ranch within the month, your position will be reserved." Stone Clara read it again and again. Then she laid it down slowly. Her chest tightened, not with excitement, but with something heavier, something wordless. Elias wiped the sweat from his brow. When he spoke, his tone was steady, kind, almost too kind. "You can go. Clara, I don't keep nobody." He looked toward the horizon, where the sunlight glinted off the field. "You're free to go. I won't hold you." And somehow, that quiet acceptance hurt more than any plea could have, because he meant it. He would rather lose her than cage her. Clara stared at the letter, her eyes blurring until the ink began to run. She traced a finger over the smudged words over the life she had once believed was her dream. The city, the job, the lie. All of it felt distant now, like a life she had already outgrown. Elias turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Elias." He paused, waiting, his back still to her. Her voice trembled, but it was clearer than it had ever been. If you won't keep me, then at least let me choose where I belong." He turned slowly. His eyes flickered, not with surprise, but with something caught between fear and hope. Clara stepped forward, holding up the letter. The afternoon sun framed her in gold, glinting off the tears still trembling on her lashes. "They want me back to keep lying, to keep living without feeling anything." But here, she looked at him, her voice breaking here. "I feel alive." Without hesitation, she walked to the hearth, the same fire where they brewed coffee every morning. The flame was small, steady, familiar. She held the letter above it for a moment, one heartbeat, then let it fall. The edges curled almost instantly, black creeping in like a shadow. Lines of ink dissolved into smoke, and the gold seal cracked open. Ash rose in soft spirals, drifting upward, then outward, carried by the wind across the porch and into the waiting fields. Elias watched silently, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped closer, stopping just beside her, so near she could feel the warmth of both the fire and his breath. "You sure about this?" Clara nodded, smiling through her tears, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm not going back. I already found home." Her eyes turned toward the open field, where green shoots were just beginning to pierce the soil they had planted together. Each sprout shimmered like a promise that the past could be buried, and the future could rise again, tender and alive. Elias didn't reply. He didn't say stay, or thank you, or I'm glad. But when he looked at her, his gaze was warmer than the fire between them. Clara reached out and caught one last fragment of ash floating in the sunlight. It melted against her fingertip, leaving only a faint black mark, a reminder, small but permanent, of the life she had chosen to let go. She smiled, softly. "That's it then. I'm free now." The late afternoon sun bent low, gilding everything in honey-colored light. The wind rolled across the prairie, scattering the ashes, blending them with the earth. And there, in that silence between the fading crackle of fire and the endless whisper of grass, a past was buried, a future was chosen, and a love, wordless but certain, stood quietly unbroken. Part 9. The Roof and the Promise. Evening descended slowly over the prairie. The sky melted from honey gold to orange, and finally into a soft violet near the edge of the horizon. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of young grass and freshly cut wood, the smell of something new being born. The little house of Elias Cole no longer looked like the lonely shack it once was. New timber stood tall where rot had been. The porch stretched wider, and the new window opened toward the sunset. Clara Hale stood in the yard, a single nail between her fingers. Her hands were stained with dust and wood shavings, but her smile was brighter than the sinking sun. Elias stepped out from behind the house, sleeves rolled, shoulders powdered with sawdust. In his hand was the same old hammer he had used for years, heavy, worn, and familiar, but today, every strike of it meant something different. He was no longer repairing the past. He was building the future. Clara held out the nail to him, but he shook his head. "No," he said, voice quiet but sure. "You do it. This house is yours too." She blinked, caught off guard, then smiled softly. Taking the hammer, she studied the shining nail resting in her palm. The light of dusk hit its head, and it gleamed like a tiny star. Elias placed a steady hand on her shoulder, his voice deep, and even the kind of voice that sounded like it came from the earth itself, just like before. One strike. Don't be afraid. She nodded, took a deep breath, and lifted the hammer. It felt heavy but no longer frightening. Thud. The first and only strike rang out, solid and sure. The porch roof trembled for an instant, then settled, firm and still. Clara turned to him, her eyes shining in the sunset's glow. Elias said nothing, only smiled, and then laid his calloused hand over hers. It was warm and rough, grounding her in the most human way possible. Her heart skipped. His voice came low, husky, carrying the weight of a promise he didn't need to make. Now it's your home, too. The words took her breath away. They weren't a confession. They weren't a vow. They were an acknowledgement, simple, honest, sacred. Clara looked around. Sunlight poured through the new windows, casting soft gold across the clean wooden floor. This was the same house she had once entered with a map and a lie, the same land she had meant to measure, claim, and take. But everything was different now. She stepped slowly across the threshold. Inside, the house was alive, the whisper of wind through curtains, the faint whistle of a kettle on the stove, the sound of Elias's footsteps just behind her. She placed her hand against the doorframe, feeling every grain of the polished wood. What had once been land to claim was now a place to live. Outside, the evening wind lifted the golden dust, carrying the scent of dry grass and fading sunlight. On the porch rail, Elias's old gloves hung beside her scarf, a small, simple union of two lives, perfectly mismatched, perfectly whole. Elias stepped beside her, the sunset warming the rugged lines of his face. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. They simply stood there together, looking out over the land that had become theirs. Clara whispered, her voice soft as breath. I've never had a place like this. Elias turned to her, eyes glimmering in the orange light. You do now. They stood side by side, their shadows stretching long across the wooden floor, weaving together like two threads finally finding the same line. The last light of the day touched the roof and glinted off the nail she had just driven in. A small, shining seal on an unspoken promise. Outside, the wind stirred the grass, carrying the warmth of the earth and the breath of a new season. Inside, the house glowed with quiet light, the light of beginning, the light of a home, and the light of two hearts that had at last found where they belonged. Part 10. The Train That Passed. Dusk settled over the western plains. The sky turned the color of aged copper, the last light slipping behind the hills where dry grass whispered softly in the wind. Far off, a train whistle echoed long and low, carried through the wide silence. Once, that sound had meant progress, civilization, and the promise of a future that left the past behind. But tonight, it was only a farewell, a distant greeting to those who had chosen to stay. On the porch, Elias Cole sat in his old wooden chair, holding a tin cup of black coffee. The steam curled upward, fading into the amber light. Beside him sat Clara Hale, quiet, her own cup long gone cold. She didn't drink, only turned it slowly in her hands, listening to the wind slip through the railings, breathing in the scent of roasted beans and prairie dust. Before them stretched the vast expanse of land rolling, golden, endless beneath the sunset. From the far horizon, the black silhouette of a train appeared, wheels grinding against steel, sparks of light flickering as it passed, The sound was steady, rhythmic but distant, almost foreign. When she had first come here, that same train line was inked on her map, the map that had once carried greed, guilt, and betrayal. Now, it was nothing more than a silver streak cutting through the sky far away, harmless and powerless against what they had built. Elias looked toward it, calm and thoughtful. "That train'll pass by here every day," he said, voice low, steady. "When I was young, I thought it stood for the future. But now I know the future ain't about what moves fast. It's about what's strong enough to stay." Clara smiled faintly. The wind lifted a few loose strands of her hair, wrapping them gently around her face. She set her cup down on the railing, her gaze soft on the glowing fields. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think I belonged in places full of noise and light. But here, I feel peace, more than anywhere else." Elias turned to her. In the amber light, her face seemed touched by something holy, no trace of the restless woman who had arrived months ago. Only stillness, only truth, only peace. The sound of the train grew louder, the metal hum blending with the prairie wind. Elias reached for the coffee pot, poured a little more into her cup. She didn't speak, only nodded, smiling in thanks. They sat there together, two silhouettes, two cups, one fading day. When the train rolled past, the ground trembled faintly underfoot. Windows along the cars flashed gold, streaks of light gliding by like fleeting memories, but neither of them looked. They both kept their eyes on the horizon, where the sky deepened to violet and smoke-thin clouds stretched like ghosts. Silence filled the space between them, not heavy, not lonely, but full. Like two souls who had wandered far and finally found where they belonged. After a while, Elias broke the quiet with a slow smile. "Used to be, when I heard that train, I felt regret. Regret that I never got on it, never left to start over somewhere else." Clara turned, her voice soft as dusk. And now Elias watched the last trace of the train fade to a thin white plume on the horizon. "Now I know I didn't miss a thing. Everything worth living for is right here." She didn't answer, just reached out and laid her hand on his. Her fingers were small, soft against his calloused skin. He squeezed back. Gently, no promises, no grand vows, just quiet certainty. The rumble faded. Only the chirping of crickets and the sighing of the wind through their newly built roof remained. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. She closed her eyes, listening to his steady breath, the wind brushing through the grass, and the song of a prairie finally at rest. A drop of coffee slid down the rim of her cup, catching the last glint of sunset before falling. "If I hadn't come here," she whispered. Elias interrupted softly, voice warm and low. "Then this land would still be just land. And I wouldn't be me anymore." She laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that comes from peace, not joy. Neither of them spoke again. They didn't have to. Love didn't need words. It only needed silence, two hearts facing the same horizon. Before them, the sun touched the earth, bursting into flame one last time. The wind rose, lifting Clara's hair, brushing it against his cheek. Elias raised his hand to shield her from the breeze, a small gesture, but enough to make her heart still. She murmured, half smiling, "The train's gone." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, and we're still here, his voice carried like a quiet prayer, steady and sure. When night fell, the only light left was from the small oil lamp on the porch, painting their faces in a soft golden glow. The world hushed the house, the plains, the wind, and for a moment, time stopped. Two people, once lost, now sitting side by side, needing nothing but each other. Far in the distance, where the train had vanished, only a pale trail of smoke lingered, dissolving into the indigo sky. A new age was coming, the world would change. But here, in this small wooden house on the edge of the prairie, two hearts had already found their forever inside. The lamp's glow flickered against the carved plank that read, "Home," her handwriting still uneven, but steady. Elias picked up his old guitar, its strings worn and soft. He strummed gently, and the sound filled the room rough, honest, imperfect, like them. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder again. The music mingled with the wind, and their breathing became one quiet rhythm. There were no more words to say. Everything that mattered had already been built in forgiveness, in kindness, in love. The camera pulled back slowly. The house shrank in the frame, just a small point of golden light in a sea of night. Around it stretched darkness, vast and endless, but that single light held steady, warm against the wind. A home, two souls once lost, and a story not about victory, but about healing. Over the sound of the soft guitar, a narrator's voice rose slow and deep. Like the wind over the plains, she came for his land, but stayed for the man who built her a home instead. The lamp's glow shimmered against the stars, and the voice continued gentle, heartfelt, carrying the soul of the Wild West. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Wild West US, where every sunset carries a story of redemption, kindness, and love reborn under the western sky. The frame faded to black, the sound of wind lingering, the guitar fading away until there was nothing left but silence. The kind of silence only true love leaves behind.
He found peace, not by forgetting his past, but by forgiving